moly, ladies and gentlemen. Holy moly. 2023 just got a whole lot more interesting as it is now basically official. SAG is going to go on strike for the first time since 1980. Pretty wild. You know, as somebody who works in entertainment and the film industry and things like that, you know, you're always kind of in this hybrid state of being employed and also out of work. And when the writer's strike happened, I was even more out of work. And now with the SAG strike, I'm going to be even more out of work. Because when you're directing stuff, it's a real Emmy, guys. When you're directing stuff, turns out you actually need people in front of the camera to say the words of the script that you are directing. So not only am I going to be more out of work, so is a lot of people in the entertainment industry. So in this video, we got to talk about the SAG strike and most importantly, relate it back to, of course, what we talk about here on the channel, which is, of course, the hobby of comic book collecting. And we got to talk about how this might affect some of the values of those comic books. But before we get into it, if you guys could drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, help support the channel, doing those things, I appreciate it. I'm going to need to sell a lot more comic books in the coming months, guys. SwagOfComics.com. But let us get into this video here today. Now, of course, if you guys happen to know, the news just came out. Hollywood actors poised to strike after SAG-AFTRA negotiations failed. The Screen Actors Guild looks almost certain to join Hollywood writers in a work stoppage for the first time since 1960. Excuse me, 1960. I thought it was 1980, like I said earlier in the video. But this is pretty wild news. Now, I want to talk about this article a little bit. I want to read it because I think it's important to kind of just get some context into it. And then I will talk a little bit about, you know, some of the comic book announcements and how I think that will affect the market. A historic double strike that will effectively shut down Hollywood appears imminent after a union representing nearly all TV and film actors failed to secure a new contract with major studios by a midnight Wednesday deadline. The Screen Actors Guild, American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, announced overnight that its negotiating committee had voted unanimously to recommend its 160,000 members strike after weeks of negotiation with companies such as Netflix, Amazon, Disney, and Warner Brothers disintegrated. SAG-AFTRA will hold a news conference at noon Los Angeles time after its national board votes on whether to make the strike official, joining in an ongoing walkout by Hollywood writers for the first time in 63 years. The studios and streamers have implemented massive unilateral changes in our industry's business model, while at the same time insisting on keeping our contracts frozen in amber. Their refusal to meaningfully engage with our key proposals and the fundamental disrespect shown to our members is what has brought us to this point. The studios and streamers have underestimated our members' resolve as they are about to fully discover. The union's president, Fran Drescher, which, yes, ladies and gentlemen, that Fran Drescher that you're thinking of, she is the union's president, also blasted the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. AMPTP's response to the union's most important proposals have been insulting and disrespectful of our massive contributions to the industry. The companies have refused to meaningfully engage on some topics and on others completely stonewalled us. Until they do negotiate in good faith, we cannot begin to reach a deal. So the article continues on to kind of talk a little bit about, you know, some of the histories of the strike and things like that. But really interesting moment in history, a really interesting moment in time that we find ourselves in with the writer's strike and also the SAG strike as well, effectively shutting down everything that Hollywood is doing. You know, there was obviously, you know, news earlier this week where we got images of Wolverine and Hugh Jackman's Wolverine wearing the yellow costume, Ryan Reynolds on set as Deadpool, things like that. And we were in a certain spot where even with the writer's strike, there were still some Hollywood productions that were able to go on. They could just work with the, you know, finished script and go from there. But at this current moment in time, I mean, if those set photos came out, say, you know, just from the other day of shooting and were instantly leaked, I mean, they're shutting down Deadpool #3's production. Anything that is currently in production, which I believe Captain America 4 is currently in production. I would assume that the Thunderbolts maybe has started shooting. I don't know if Covenant of Chaos is still sort of in production. Daredevil, Born Again, all of these shows that were in production, they're shutting down all of them for sure. If the SAG strike happens, Hugh Jackman will no longer be on set. And that was actually one of the interesting issues with, what's going on with San Diego Comic-Con. They took, Marvel stepped away from Hall H because they weren't going to be doing any of these actor announcements. And I think that this is why we've been starting to see some of these press reports come out in the last couple of days before this strike actually did happen. I think that there was probably some insider information. For instance, yesterday we talked about in our video how there was the announcement of Nathan Fillion coming out as Guy Gardner Green Lantern, and that obviously set the comic book market on fire with that announcement. I have a feeling that James Gunn probably knew that this strike was coming and thought to himself, these were some announcements that maybe we were going to bring to San Diego Comic-Con. Maybe we were going to have some of these announcements, in the coming weeks. We better get this stuff in before the writer strike, before the SAG strike actually happens, because otherwise their hands are going to be tied for any sort of PR that they can generate for who knows how long the strike is going to go. I mean, a lot of people think right now the writer strike is going to go out until December, but there's no real way to figure that out at this time. And I think that that's kind of one of the important things in talking about, the comic book market, how this is going to have an effect on the values, on the hype that's out there. And really, I think that this is going to have a big effect in some ways and not such a big effect in others. Obviously, anytime you get casting announcements, anytime you get show announcements or option properties or things like that, that's going to create movement in the market. That's going to create excitement. Just the other day after I did my video, we had the announcement of the casting of Metamorph. And to me, I have the feeling that, again, this is probably stuff that they knew that the SAG strike was coming, and they were like, okay, we got to get this announcement in so that these actors can participate in the PR of these announcements. If you don't have a united front with the PR machine pushing those things where, the studio announces it, James Gunn announces it, Nathan Fillion goes on his Twitter, reposts the Deadline article, or he posts it on his Instagram, you got to have this stuff united on all fronts, pushing this stuff out. And I think that's probably why they wanted to get some of those announcements in, because when SAG goes on strike, they're no longer going to be able to participate in any sort of PR stuff for the projects that they're involved in. Not only will they not be working, but they will definitely not be promoting any projects either. And I think that this is really interesting because, it was Ryan Reynolds himself that initially shared that Hugh Jackman in his yellow costume set photo. And I think that Ryan Reynolds sharing that photo was probably the main driver of why it caught the market by storm so much. I mean, certainly if that was a leaked photo that came out on some, Reddit link or whatever, people would be talking about it. People would be excited. But I think, because it's Ryan Reynolds himself that is putting it out there, because he's leading the charge on it, I think it makes it that much more exciting. So a lot of these, hype announcements that kind of find their way into the comic book market and move books and cause people to get FOMO and go crazy and pick up, Marvel Comics Presents 95, the origin of the yellow suit, which, again, why does anyone really need a origin of a yellow suit in their comic book collection? I don't know. But again, hey, to each their own. The point is that I think that that is a huge driver in getting people excited in the comic book market. And it's been my personal belief that in Q3 and Q4 later on this year, I think that we're going to have pullbacks in the macro environment, the macro economy, and that's going to hurt some of the values of comic books naturally. And now if you don't have these little, PR announcements, or you don't have these casting announcements, and you don't have San Diego Comic-Con, you don't have D23 where they're going to bring out the Fantastic Forecast and Adam Driver's going to be like, I can't wait to be, Reed Richards or whatever. The lack of those things is also going to play a role in values of comic books likely going down, because, that stuff generates interest. Even if you're somebody out there who, doesn't buy Marvel Comics Presents number 95, just the movement of that comic book market, just the volume that goes on, just the velocity that changes hands within comic books and money, and people are talking about it and people are sharing, that in and of itself creates interest in other things in the comic book market. People look at Wolverine 95, they see that it's moving the market, they laugh to themselves, why are people FOMOing on this book? They should go get a Hulk 181. Hey, maybe I should go get a Hulk 181. And then they end up buying a Hulk 181. And then that person gets their Hulk 181 money, and they take that money and they move it to some other book, and then that person sells their book and moves it to some other book. And you got to have this, news cycle and velocity of money in order to keep interest within the comic book market. And if you don't have that, people start to lose interest and they start to walk away from the hobby. And that ultimately forces dealers to, lower their prices so they can drive interest for people to buy comic books and stuff. So, having these things is very, very important. And I do think that, we're entering very, very interesting territory where after a little bit of a time, we're going to see a lack of, PR. We're going to see a lack of news announcements. We're going to see a lack of trailers that create interest in comic books. And it'll be interesting to see how this does ultimately have an effect on comic values in Q3 and Q4. But very, very interesting stuff. I mean, what do you guys think about this? I know it's a little bit adjacent to that of what we discuss here on the YouTube channel, but it is a huge story that is still developing. I think it's going to have a cascading effect on the MCU and the DC universe, and it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. But let me know what you guys think. Of course, like, comment, subscribe. We're going to need to sell a lot more comic books, guys. We're going to need to sell a lot more comic books. So I got HouseComics.com. Anyways, that's all I got. See you on the next video.